Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life.
When divorce is something you're contemplating or your husband told you he wants, everything about it is extremely important. And I think that one of the biggest challenges women have is they don't know where to begin or feel overwhelmed. What do I do first? So that's what I want to talk about today, and steps that can help women begin to get in control and begin to maybe have a plan, because I believe that when you have a plan, it eases a lot of the anxiety, and then you know which direction you're going. So let's talk about first, like you get that somebody emails you, reaches out, they say, Sarah, what do I do? What's your advice? What do you tell them?
The first place I start, Heather, is trying to first understand, why are we having this conversation? Why are we here? And why are we having this conversation now? A lot of times they've been contemplating divorce for a long time before they're coming to us. So the question of why now is very poignant, and why are we here is also very important, because part of the overwhelm is they're still in pain over why am I here and why is this happening? All the other conversations about financials, about do I get the house? Does he get the house? Should I stay in the same neighborhood? What do I do about the kids' school? All these things become just so much noise and overwhelm when they haven't yet settled that first internal feeling of, how am I here? Our job is to make sure we're clear and they're clear on, why is this happening? And why is this happening now? Because if I'm speaking to somebody who's been married for 10 years, unhappily married for 10 years, and they are coming to me now, my first question is, why are you doing this now? And that question may be, now the kids are old enough that it feels like it's a better time, or I have established myself with a good job. These are important to know, but I find as advisors and advocates, it's our job that we keep bringing them back to that why, because once we figure out the why and we stay clear on that and it's not wavering, then we can go to the how. What do we know about your day-to-day budget? What do we know about your monthly budget? What do you need to be on your own? If you don't know the answers to that, that's okay. They want to figure a lot of these financial things out before they talk to an attorney, and a good attorney will help them in that journey of figuring these things out. We can ask good questions. A good advisor can give you criteria on how to think about your finances and what questions you should be asking instead of you. I think you can start that conversation with a good attorney earlier on and say, here's everything I don't know. And part of what I'm hiring you for is helping me educate myself on this process. We come up with a strategy of, okay, go have that midnight kitchen table conversation with him, but let's not limit the strategy options that we have with you because we didn't get a chance to hear all the details and advise you before you went and did that. Revealing to him that you are filing first or offering a settlement offer, please let your attorney have an opportunity to speak to you and strategize with you, because once the cat's out of the bag on some of these things, it limits our strategy options. So to Heather's point, even if you're thinking about it, you should speak to an attorney first.
Because you may be wondering, like, okay, because I'm going to play on this whole no spousal support or limited, if there's an affair, that might be a really good reason to try to reconcile. At least they know that, right? Because they don't know what they don't know. And hey, it might be worth it. We would never advise that, nor would you if there's any kind of dangerous situation. But if you're trying to establish and evaluate what are your options and what are potential consequences of those actions, whether good or bad, you need to know. It would be a huge piece of information to find out when you're trying to figure out if you're going to get a divorce and trying to plan for it. Sure.
A lot of women need to understand that sometimes just because he is hanging around doesn't mean that he doesn't want the divorce. I see this all the time, that we have husbands that just dig their head in the sand, and the woman comes to us and still thinks there's something there. After they give us all this information, they tell us that they've spoken to the therapist, and the therapist has validated that, hey, he doesn't want to work on this. He's done. He's checked out. Tend to stay in a miserable situation longer and drag the family through that for years than a woman. When a woman is done, a woman is done. And sometimes they almost have to be the hero and say, you know what, like, it took two of us to break this marriage apart, but I'm going to have to be the one that does the cleanup work and goes to the divorce attorney. And that's heartbreaking for women. And myself, as a married woman who's gone through a lot of my own marriage, like, that's a lot. And I hate that for women, but it is part of something we just need to be aware of in these conversations, that just because he's hanging in here and he hasn't filed first doesn't mean he's here.
Exactly. And sometimes they can compartmentalize it, right? He's doing whatever he wants. You're doing all the work at home. He goes to work, goes out with his friends, and he really doesn't have to put in that emotional work at home for a lot of that. And when they tell me, I'm like, why would he? It's so easy for him right now. There's no reason for him to push this, divide the money, have the conflict, when he might be not in a fulfilled relationship, but in a lot of ways it's working for that part of the marriage. I think many times they are like, you're going to have to do it for whatever it is. It's just the complacency and they're maybe being stoic. I can get through this, and I can find other interests, where it's too hard for women to be like, no, we have a family, we have kids, we have a house.
Right.
It's harder. But now let's talk a little bit about financial, because I know many times women will call our office and, what do I need to bring, right? Should I bring all the tax returns? Should I bring all of these things? At that very initial meeting, I tell them that's fine. However, we will get there in the next step, because we need to really figure out first, we're gonna work together, why you're getting divorced. I think it's wise for women to begin collecting documents. I love the scanning options on your phone, because in the electronic world we live in, you have limited access. It's not like if you can see all of the statements that come in the mail, could all be locked down on his computer. So to the extent you can do some sleuthing, you might not understand it and you might not know everything, but I think that's important. I don't ever really discourage anything.
I definitely think that anytime you're going through a very painful time in your life, you can turn it into a very powerful moment in your life. I can look back to some of the most painful moments in my life, and the knowledge I had to gather, the awareness I had to bring, or even just the technical information I had to learn to get through that painful moment, turned into a source of power. I think the first consultation needs to be exactly what we're talking about. Is this the right team for me? And is this the right decision for me right now? What are some general things I need to consider before I make a move on my own without knowing the consequences? Next step in our office is the strategy session. Once we're past all this, then we go into the strategy session. That's when I think you should bring all these things. Gather any documents you can get your hand on. One of the most powerful documents that you can start with is just running a credit report. Women will be shocked to see how many things their name is on that the husband is using their credit score for, because they might have maxed out their credit score. Or so I think that's a very valuable thing that we can just start with, of knowing what's on there. And a lot of times you can have access to his as well, because when time comes, you want to hire an attorney, and we want to keep that fact that you've hired an attorney.
And just, again, as part of building your independence and your ability to strategize, and that's the way it's going, right? You are going to have independence from this person, this relationship, so to start taking those steps. And we advise, it's time to get a new email address. If people in the household share a computer, it's easy to get on their Gmail account. I suggest you get a new email address. Talk to your attorney on that. Shut down social media. If you don't want to show it to your attorney or your mom, it's probably best to delete that.
Text messages, social media, these are all admissible pieces of evidence. So be careful with all of that.
Everybody takes screenshots, things like that. We touched on the infidelity and the implications on alimony, which is shocking in our case. We know how sexist that is, because men didn't used to ask for alimony 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So that's unbelievable there. I was fired up with that. Regardless of going through the divorce, there is the topic of, I just met the nicest guy. I think, oh, and he'll never stick around or he won't last, so I better start dating. I think it's terrible. As we get to this part, this is the most important, because it's the importance of clients. You can't just hire us and then go put your head in the sand and let us do everything. right?
No, I think that the biggest part of this is nobody knows the psychology and the needs of your family like you do. We need you to help us say, if I zig, he's going to zag. Because we can come up with the most brilliant plan and the best argument that any divorce attorney's ever come up with. But until we know how is that going to undo the domino effect 10 steps down the road, it might be useless to your case. When we're preparing a settlement offer, there is specific language we can put in a cover letter to that settlement offer that makes that settlement offer speak directly to the opposing party that we wouldn't know. Only you could tell us that, you know what? Biggest thing he cares about is for his reputation to not get damaged through this divorce process. The biggest thing he cares about is for his family to feel like him and I fought hard for this marriage and we didn't just give up. Personality traits and identities and things that we're not going to know about your spouse, and we never will get the chance to if you don't help us with that strategy building. So yes, you need to be an active participant in this, and it's the same thing in anything you do in life. You have to be an active participant for decisions around your future.
Yes, and I know for some women listening that might seem daunting and like, what do you mean? We're going to tell you, we're going to ask questions, we're going to educate you, we are going to tell you what you need to know and things that you didn't even think about, because that's our job. At the end of the day, we need your participation because we're going to help you, but where do you want to be, right? Where do you want to be 3 years from now? Because getting out of this divorce, that's one thing, but there's so much we can do to set you up for your future. We have to have those conversations.
This is not cleaning up house before you bring the housekeeping crew in. This is conversations that a strong legal team will lead you through proper questioning. You do not need to come to us and have all these answers. You do not need to come to us and know the full psychology of your spouse while we're putting together a settlement offer. And I think that's one of the biggest things people need to be looking for is the quality of questions that are asked of you about your future. Like, where's your family support system, inner circle? Where are they at? That's a great question. Beyond, we got you divorce papers and we avoided taking you to court. Wonderful. Great. What's next?
I think that comes from client participation in the strategy meetings, but also, just like you said, for the women listening, you got to pick the right attorney, right? You have to go to the right firm. This is a big process, and you want somebody who is going to ask you a lot of questions and who is more concerned about your future than just getting through the process. The overall logistics of most divorces, they all have the same part, right? Some have more issues than others, and there's a formula, but it's the people and their relationships. Their children are going to be different. To me, sometimes those are the most important questions, because just like you said, with trying to settle a case, and we have mediation, that's mandatory, but we need to know what it is your main goal is in trying to reach settlement, because there may be an opportunity to create a settlement agreement for you. We don't know your family traditions. People have lots of traditions around holidays, and sometimes not all Christmas and Thanksgiving. There can be really special holidays that are important, and you want to make sure that's included, because in Florida, they look at the basic school schedule, and that's how they determine what the holidays are. But I think that's really important for clients to know that, hey, if there's something really important for you and your kids, your traditions, we have an opportunity to include that in a settlement, and maybe even in front of the court, because these are important things you can ask for. But if you don't tell us, and likewise, if your attorney doesn't really ask good questions about that, no, we're not going to know, and we're going to miss a great opportunity to give you really even more valuable settlement agreements.
And see, Heather, this is why I'm wary of the divorce attorney that on that first consult goes straight into, that's what 50 other cases have you used this cookie cutter formula that you're now imposing on this person who you've met for the first time and can't truly know all these family traditions, all the goals, the dreams, the hopes for the future in this 60-minute time period that really should first be spent on the initial questions we propose, which is why now? Why is this happening? Where do you want to be? Versus, okay, let me get my yellow legal pad out and click my pen and start creating you a child custody plan within the first 15 minutes that I've met you.
Is this what you want? Is this going to get you to your end goal? If we don't plan for the outcomes, we're not going to take the right path. For divorce, I have worked with many certified divorce financial analysts. Could you tell our listeners about that?
The Certified Divorce Financial Analyst credential, if you will, is something that really is intended to help financial experts dive a little bit deeper into the aspects related to the divorce process. I'm specifically helping women navigate through the financial aspects of the divorce. I've developed processes to help women just really make good, empowered decisions as they're going through the divorce process.
And that's so important. And I really think it's an advantage for women when they have someone separate from their legal team. We're not helping them necessarily make all these financial decisions, but we're discussing them and what we're looking at, where they are now, what exists, and what assets mean, helping them understand that, but then get more education from an expert in that area, but also that'll give them more insight into what they do want for their future, which is really what we're trying to do as we are going through the divorce and helping them look at not all assets are the same and which ones will help you achieve your goals in the future. And this is your budget now. We have alimony in Florida, and if they're a candidate, how is that going to help you to where you want to be? So having someone with those credentials, resources, and experience, I think, makes such a big difference for women going through a divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it helps the attorneys, right? Because a lot of times the attorneys are saying, what is it that you want? And the clients don't know. Like that sounding board. I just got off the phone with a client who was saying the same thing. The attorney's, okay, do you want to keep the rentals? Do you not? And she's like, it's hindering her from making a decision where I'm going to hop on with her. We're going to spend an hour, talk through some of those things, and she'll be in a better position to say, okay, I have some clarity on how I want to move forward. And then the attorney can help navigate through those next steps once that decision has been made.
Absolutely. What happens many times is the women were entering the divorce process, and all of a sudden they have a lot of decisions to make. Often, if you're not used to making a lot of decisions, it can be overwhelming. Haven't used that muscle of making a decision as a business owner. We have a lot of decisions, so that muscle gets used a lot for us. But as women coming into a divorce, they may not, even if they're used to making decisions in their professional life or even with the children. These are so foreign and it seems so monumental, like these decisions. And do I want to keep this property or sell the house? It's a lot and overwhelming. You shared how you came to specialize in divorce finances. You were in a financial firm, right? Like all those investment companies with probably a group of people. And I know you said you really wanted to become more specific and focused on women, right? Going through this process.
Yes, absolutely. The precipice for my decision was in my area. I work all over the country, but there was a healthcare facility launching in my area designed to help. They wanted to revolutionize the experience for women that were going through different stages in their life. And I remember thinking, gosh, I wish there was something like that from a financial perspective. That was very early in my career in the early 2000s in the financial industry. I had a lot of women saying, Rhonda, I'm overwhelmed. I'm frustrated. I don't know what direction to be going. And I just remember thinking there just has to be a better way, right? And I thought there would be a better way already existing in the marketplace. And at the time, there wasn't. So I developed Women's Financial Wellness Center to be that space for women. It's been fantastic. We want to get them through the process with a better understanding of the finances and have a greater confidence for their decision-making capabilities.
It's a great start to their future and really set them up for success. And I think it's amazing, and I have not heard of anything like that anywhere. Really specific for women and financial wellness. I want to understand my finances and be in control so that then I can have some freedom with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is I don't hate men. Like a lot of it, oh no, I just want women to be empowered and level the playing field so they can make good decisions. That's really important. There's been times when women will say, I don't want to take my husband to the cleaners. Neither do I. We don't want to do that, but we don't want you to struggle more than you need to after the divorce.
I don't hate men either. I just want to help women. I just want you to win. I'm not trying to make him lose, but I want you to win.
That's right.
And the law's not going to allow me to take him to the cleaners, but if I can do that for you, I will. Because I want to get you as much money as we can, but this is the one shot. I feel strongly about that because I do know the law is basically going to split it in half, and then we have alimony and support. But I am committed, and our team is, to get you in the best situation
That's
we
right.
possibly can.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
the male, your husband may think you're taking them to the cleaners, but the reality is. But anyway, now let's talk a little bit. For our listeners, I'd love to help them understand the certified divorce analysis and that certification, how that differs from, say, a CPA or a forensic accountant.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, the CPAs are specializing in tax, right? But they're not necessarily doing the projections. They're just looking at the situation for now and giving some guidance and direction around the tax aspect. A lot of the forensic accountants are CPAs by trade, and then they have additional credentials that allow them to specialize in doing the forensics, which a lot of times people will hear from their attorney, oh, you should get a forensic accountant. But a lot of times people are, I don't really know what that means, right? So it's basically where they're going back and they're tracing and looking for trends. They're looking for lost, wasted, hidden money. It's a detailed, specialized area. My role and the way I run my business is to have a strategy, look at the big picture, figure out what we need to do. And I have a specific process that I take women through that takes each of the pieces related to the financial aspect. But one of them is identifying gaps. And that's where we take a deeper dive in looking at, are there areas where you might need to pull in an additional expert, like a forensic accountant, like a business valuation expert? What are you looking for? And what's the scope of their engagement? So I always look at those forensic accountants, business valuation experts as add-on services that not everybody's going to need, but if they do, how do we identify a good candidate for that service? What does that look like? What's the scope of the work? How much is it going to be? And do we think that we can move the needle by engaging those services? My role is a sounding board for people as it relates to that. And then once that information comes available, we get the report back. I review the report and then figure out, okay, how does that fit into the whole picture?
And that is so helpful because that's what they need. And it's helpful from, you've done that analysis. Hey, these are the assets, at least from my perspective, legally, experts may need to educate me on what you have and how those are going to be treated, those assets. But usually we got to educate the judge, and I'm not the one to do that. We need somebody potentially to come in and testify and say, of course, all these assets, as you know, aren't, treated equally, and particularly rental property. Oh my gosh, that opens up a lot, and there can be a lot of different tax treatment and ramifications that, so it matters because not all assets are the same. And so it's so often important that one, that expert has evaluated that, explains that to the client as well as the attorney, but sometimes ultimately the judge or through a mediation process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, have you ever worked in a collaborative divorce team?
Yeah, absolutely. I am trained in the collaborative process. And usually I play one of two roles. Traditionally, there's a financial neutral, and that person is intended to crunch the numbers and provide education for both of the parties. There are times when I'm the advocate behind the scenes, aware of the collaborative process. I'm working with my client to help them show up to collaborative meetings, educated and empowered, because the neutral can't give advice or direction. They're there to educate and present the data. That has been helpful. Knowing the different options. I love the collaborative process. It can be very helpful. The role I play depends on the situation.
I know you have statistics about divorces, particularly with women. We're drawn to help women in divorces, particularly financially. What do the statistics tend to show?
Yeah, absolutely. Women initiate divorce 69% of the time. Women have a threshold for putting up with stuff when they're done. I've given you so many opportunities to get it together, and finally they're just like, I'm done with this. Most women spend at least 2 years contemplating. By the time they reach out to me, they're usually ready to go. They don't just wake up one day and say, I'm getting divorced. They've been contemplating. They've been spending energy and time trying to figure out what direction they want to go. And then the last one that I think is really relevant, particularly to the work that I'm doing, and it's actually part of my mission, is to help alleviate the number of women whose lifestyle goes down after divorce. And we know that it typically goes down about 41%. And I have some very specific reasons why I think that happens. I think there's manipulation, bullying, and transparency. Do we have a full picture of what's going on? Do the women understand what they're signing or signing off on prior to them doing that? So there's a lot of factors that go into it.
I think so. And one is exactly what you said. And I like that bullying because I think women, they've been thinking about this, they're ready, they're done. And there is a tendency, and this is just what I have found in my experience over so many years of helping women through divorce. They're like, I just want it over. I'm just doing it. Oftentimes we give the pep talk, but it's like, we're almost there. And I know you are scared to death of a trial. However, just this deal they're offering or where they are in mediation, you will do better in front of a judge. The law is on your side. If you can just hang in there because we're almost there, it is going to make a huge difference for your future. Many times women don't have advice from someone like you or their attorney and they can't deal with it anymore. They end up settling for less than they maybe were entitled to and not fully thinking through their future, which we all have that conversation with them as well, because we're doing your divorce now, dealing in the present, but I am thinking about you in 3 years from now. And so that's what I want you to think about. Because all these things, you're like, I don't want this, I don't need this, but you really do, and you're going to feel different in 3 years. And so let's take a pause and think about your future as we go through this. Let's talk about the first things women should do, taking financial steps for themselves when they're ready to file, or maybe they've already filed. What would you advise some things that they begin doing that can help empower themselves forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I think is related to the expenses. It's a great time to jot down expenses, start being more aware of spending habits. I believe the budget is essential for future negotiations. And I know that as part of most of the disclosure statements for the financial aspect, there is a section on expenses. And I think at the end of the day, it gets minimized, but it is really important because it's the baseline for being able to answer all of the what if questions. Can I buy the home? Can I refinance? How much for health insurance? All those questions come back to the budget and play into support conversations as well. Very much, right? So that's one that I would say is certainly an important part of starting to gather and organize financial documents can be overwhelming for people. But I always say women make really good private investigators when they have to be, because all of a sudden they're like, oh, look, I found in the recycling bin a bunch of statements. Oh, imagine that. Like they find things, which is awesome, right? That can be really helpful. Certainly, if people cannot get access to information, I know that's where the legal aspect comes in, right? And being able to leverage some of the whether it's interrogatories and asking those questions or subpoenaing information, the attorney plays a really important role in getting some of that information. The biggest question is where do we start looking? Because you're relying on both parties to be transparent. So one of the things that we will sometimes do is engage private investigators to help with asset searches. And it's very fascinating because we are usually able to really identify some clues that then at least helps the attorney know where to be looking. And it's been a game changer for many of our clients. My role in that is to help facilitate that and then help get the information back, take a look at it, review it, and then deliver that to the client. So they're just not getting a lot of information that can be a sucker punch when you're like, he has what? Where? What's going on? It can be unsettling. Two things really quick. One is requesting the tax transcripts from the IRS. If you're not able to access previous tax returns and you're like, I think I've signed them but haven't seen any, that's an easy way to request that information. The caveat I learned recently is if they haven't filed joint in the past, which they're married and filed separate, then they're not going to be able to access that. But as long as they've filed joint, so it's a good way for them to gather information. And then the other part that I have found that just helps neutralize emotions around finances is when you find information, a statement, an email, you find something that is you say, isn't that interesting? And what it does is it helps neutralize the what is going on here. We get emotionally charged. So it's a good place for people to just remember.
I think that's great. Remember being curious, although very often, like you said, you're gonna be like, yes, what? Like this happened, what? So the anger, there are gonna be emotions.
For sure.
So I know that it's difficult to keep that play, but again, it's being curious and understanding that's the first step is getting all of this information, and then we'll figure out what to do with it and how it plays out.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
I think you were going to say something about getting your credit report can also, because then you might have more things under your name that you were aware of as well, right? So that can be a starting point.
One of my favorite tools is Credit Karma because it's free. It gives us proactive. So rather than us having to go out and pull the credit report and remember to stay on top of it, it's out of sight, out of mind. It sends us an email or it sends us a text message when there has been a change to the credit report. And so I've been using it for 8 years to monitor that, and it's been helpful to see.
And that is great for everybody with identity theft and everything. And increasing your financial intelligence, awareness, it's a good thing for anybody.
Mediation, what is it?
Mediation is court ordered. It can be voluntary, but in all divorces in Florida, it is required before a trial. It is a process where a mediator that has been certified by the state of Florida, most of them are lawyers, and I believe that the better ones are because they have had practice in family law and they mediate, and their job is to act as a neutral. They don't represent either side, but to help the parties reach a settlement, a resolution. And what that does is that allows everything to be reduced to an agreement before they leave, and really allows the parties to move on with their life without having to go to trial and having a judge make all the decisions.
Okay, so it sounds like having a judge make all the decisions, is that something you try to avoid?
Oh, absolutely. If you can have part in the decision making, that's better. It's just not always possible. Sometimes you're just in a situation, and from our perspective, the husband just is not going to come to an agreement that is really, reasonable based on the law and the facts. So you do have to go to trial, and you will be better off because you're in such a situation where you can't have a reasonable agreement. Even in a multi-day trial, the judge is doing the best they can. They are only given relevant facts and evidence, and they are bound by the law in making certain decisions. So not really an opportunity to have creative solutions.
Gotcha. So this actually, and we're going to get into this later, this allows you to take a part in this process, mediation.
It does. And there is also a part of it that is very therapeutic, because in mediation, it's much less formal, which we'll talk about, but you can speak freely. The laws of evidence are not, don't apply. You can explain your side of the story to the mediator in a way that will not be permissible or appropriate in a court setting.
Permissible or appropriate. I like the way you put that. Would you say most cases are settled at mediation?
I would say 85 to 90%. Yes, the majority of cases are. Sometimes they require more than one mediation, and we have done that in the past. But yes, a lot of them do resolve at mediation.
Okay, you said more than one?
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
I'm thinking that.
Some cases do go on for a long time. Maybe you mediated within the first year. Believe it or not, we've continued to litigate for the second year. Keep in mind, we are in 2022, but having come off 2020, which half the year the courts got bogged down and the pandemic, some cases have drawn out further absent that interruption. It's been a year since they mediated, and maybe their positions have changed, their recognition of the reality of costs have changed, maybe some facts have changed. So it's not always appropriate, but sometimes it is.
That's interesting. Before you go to mediation, what do you go over with your attorney?
Well, there's a lot. And, what we go over
with our clients, the basics, of course, like what is mediation, what to expect. If fully prepared during mediation, which often I would say the other side is not because it goes on for so long. But if you're really prepared for mediation, we have gone over with you, number one, all of the issues that we are going to attempt to settle. And that can be, that can be several issues. So that can be time consuming. I explain to clients, what's your best day in court, worst day, middle ground. I want our clients at Florida Women's Law Group to hear that with their attorneys and to come to those decisions and say, okay, this is the high end of that. This is the low end. We'll advise them. We might end up in trial. These are areas we'll negotiate at mediation. It helps because, Julie, you and I've been doing this for a while, this show, and I'm sure you can appreciate there's such an emotional component to the divorce that sometimes we're unable to settle. Clients are unable to settle because they are not prepared to accept what they're hearing. If we, as their attorneys, can prepare them for this is what I expect you to hear, and these are the scenarios, then they're more prepared as we go into mediation for what they're going to hear and what the issues are going to be.
You just brought up emotionally prepared. In a different setting, as far as mediation versus a courtroom setting, mediation, you're able to get some stuff out. Court, you can't.
That is right. It's not advised. Sometimes people may say something and can't help themselves, but not usually advised. The judge is going to stop them. It's not the proper venue.
When you stop a person, it gets them fired up more. You just don't know what's going to happen afterwards. So
Correct.
One of the things that we talked about last week and want to go more in depth into this is when you meet with your attorney, you're going over a lot: financials, assets, debts, and children. This all comes up in mediation. Really, this seems to come up really every step of the way.
It does. So it's a conversation all the time. What's our position on if there are children involved on the timesharing schedule? Sometimes cases may be like, hey, the finances were pretty agreeable on, but kids, not so much, or vice versa, or everything's at issue. And we just don't see eye to eye, the parties on either one. So we try to tackle, an issue at a time during mediation. However, we tend to go in an order that addresses the issues because they do all intertwine. I mean, everything is related to another, but we do try to go in a certain order most of the time to get to a resolution.
Ahead of time, you need to make sure that the client understands as well as the attorney understands what's most important to the client.
Exactly. And that brings up a point. What we have always done in the past and do is ask the client, write down your wish list. How do you wish this will end up on each of these issues? And I'll tell you why that's important. Because one, it allows the client not only to think it out, but then write it down, like really spend some time on this. And then they can share it with their attorney. Another attorney might say they can't have their wish list. You don't know that because you don't know what's on it. I want our clients to work through it, talk about each issue. Doing that prior to mediation allows them to hear it, not for the first time. Trust me, you can be stuck on one issue for hours. If I discuss it with the client, their wish list may be unreasonable, but maybe not. At least I know, and then we can discuss it. And then we talk about, okay, this is what you want. I understand that. And we can go into mediation asking that. Mediation is a consensus, a give and take. It's important to say, you want this so badly, you're going to have to give up somewhere else. That's human nature and negotiation. So it's getting, the clients to begin thinking about that, which is also very important.
Are there times when someone says, I'm just not going to bend? I've done enough and it is not happening.
Yes, it seems as though you may have been in some of our mediations. How did you guess that? Because that is human nature. You think I'm giving, and where are they giving? A good mediator helps work through that because I'm not privy to the other room, but they're feeling the same way. Everybody feels they're giving and the other side is not.
Let's touch on that point you mentioned. If you want to listen to this show, and I definitely encourage you to do so, you can go to our website, womenwinningdivorce.com, to download the podcast and also subscribe. Last show, I was shocked because I thought everyone was in a room together, and that is not the case.
In trial, you don't just get to say what you want when you want. See, there is a benefit to having that privacy, that opportunity to vent in a way that is more constructive. If it goes beyond that, then we're like, all right, we've gone beyond constructive venting. It's time to get back on track. And even as the attorney, I do sometimes say that I'm looking out for our client's best interest. Intuitively, based on the facts and the law, I recognize some of the things that the client wants, they won't get in court. And therefore, the more we're willing to negotiate to get things that matter to them, that's a win.
Patience. You need patience. Some things that you may have going on in your life may be a little bit embarrassing. So is that something I should hold back from my attorney if it's going to benefit me, even if it's embarrassing?
You know, when you're with your attorney, and that is a trust relationship, that it is important that you have enough trust to share that. For most individuals going through a divorce, they don't know what they don't know. Will it matter? Is it something my attorney should know? Tell us. I'll let you know if it's relevant. Generally, they bring up the same things. I tell them that is not going to affect the outcome from a perspective of telling the judge. I know it matters to you. You're hurt and upset about what your spouse has done. It's not relevant evidence that the court is going to consider. And therefore, given the amount of time we have in a courtroom setting, it's not helpful. In mediation, that discussion can come up, but there comes a point when you get diminishing returns. You have to move on, which is difficult. You have to move on beyond the hurt if we are going to settle this case. As the advocate for my client, sometimes the mediator needs to say, it's time to move on.
Who has the final say on the outcome of mediation?
Both parties. You can get to the 13th hour, everything's been written down, and they can walk away. We don't advise that. That's a lot of time and money spent, but nobody's going to force you. You know, my goal is for help our clients understand and appreciate their possibilities. This is what's going to happen in court. This is what we've agreed to. This is the downside. Nobody's going to hold it against you if you don't settle. But it's just appreciating the consequences, but basically, yes, consequences or realistic outcomes and making a decision.
Mediation is legally binding.
If you sign the agreement. Ideally, that's the ideal situation, that we've spent this time and the negotiations have come to a result. It's all reduced to writing and we sign it.
So it becomes legally binding. If you've signed it, you've agreed to it.
However, it's so important to be prepared for trial. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think trial is not only important for them to be prepared, but also for their voice to be heard.
And that doesn't happen as often as our clients believe it will, correct?
Exactly.
As far as talking to the judge and being heard. When you have something to say and you want to be heard, it becomes really important, even in this venue where it's not necessarily designed
Exactly.
for our clients just to have a free reign and tell them what they think, right?
Right.
I've mentioned this several times on the show. When we're watching TV, watching the legal shows, I love it. I watch Law and Order all the time, and I've seen everything for the past like 30 something years. But, you know, I mean, that's the criminal law. It's not the divorce case. However, you know, they can commit the crime, investigate, go to court, and finish a trial within 60 minutes. That's unrealistic expectations. So I
Absolutely.
think it's fair for the general public and be like, well, what do you mean? A year? We should wrap this up quickly.
Exactly.
And there's always an exciting outburst in a trial that doesn't really happen in our day-to-day trials, right?
Absolutely. It's a totally different experience. And what we're getting on television is basically a microwave version of real life.
And a more dramatic version. Otherwise, we wouldn't watch it, right?
True. I wouldn't say that family law is not without its dramatics, but it's a different level and it's a more so personal level, which is why we feel so attached more so to family law and opposed to what we see on television with the criminal aspect.
I completely agree with you. Before we get into preparing for trial in Northeast Florida, but in Florida, you know, how a family law trial even works, because it's nothing like TV. We're not in a courtroom with the jury, right?
Exactly. No, we're not. We're essentially just in a hearing room before the judge.
Which is unnerving. I started in criminal law, and it's a big deal what table you get, because you know, the right side, which I was a prosecutor, is always closer to the jury. We're on opposite sides, good and evil. And
Correct.
in family law, same thing. I'm on the good side, the evil side, not really, but a little bit. But it's hard. The very first time I went into those hearing rooms, we're all at the same table.
Exactly.
And that can be something that I know our clients don't expect, because we're looking not only at the other attorney, but harder for our clients, they got to look at their husband the whole time.
And that's part of the trial preparation. Let them know that even with COVID, things converted to Zoom. And so that was a difficult thing as well, because just because you're not in the same space, you don't necessarily want to be eye to eye with the person on the other side. So that is part of the trial preparation. It is unnerving, but we work together to accomplish what we want.
Yes. Part of that is, as I've, matured over these many years of doing family law, trying to make it, I get it with, there's the judge doesn't wear a robe, they're dressed in a suit. There's false sense of informality in this hearing room, because we're not in the big courtroom with a witness stand. We still have to follow all the formalities of the court and evidentiary procedure, as well as civil procedure.
Something as simple as presentation. When you're coming to the courtroom, you're going to be dressed differently to give reverence to the court, even though it's not the traditional thing that you would see on television.
That does vary, because some judges here, not in formality or dress. We always want to look our best and be dressed professionally. But some courtrooms in different counties are in a courtroom. And I prefer that it lends itself to all participants stepping up. When you go to a witness stand, I like to stand when I speak. In a traditional courtroom, you can stand and speak. So I think
that's a very good point, because you can take into account the area, be able to maneuver around as well. So that is a good point with regard to the hearing rooms. We're sitting the entire time.
That can be a long day, 2 days, or a week. I can tell you, you're like, I wish I could just walk around and talk. So when preparing for trial, that's the first thing we talk to our client about, based on where they are. Hey, this is the setting you're going to walk into, and
Correct.
How we prepare them for that, right?
Yes.
And when we talk about the first steps to preparing for trial, we want our clients to understand this is what you're looking at as far as the day, 2 days, no matter how much time we have together. But we need your input, because our clients know their spouse, their children much better than we do. And we really have to have that involvement so that we're able to accomplish their goals. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
When we're wanting that, what are some of the things that you talk to your clients about when going to trial? We didn't resolve this case. What are some of the things? I know they're anxious.
Definitely. And so with regard to trial, details are extremely important. So one of the first questions I ask is, what's the worst thing he could say about you? If we know the worst thing, we won't be blindsided with evidence or a topic that we weren't prepared for. So we like to deal with the worst first and get additional information from them with regard to, like you said, their spouse, the kids, all those small nuances that I'm not going to know that's particular to your family. Once I get that information, the next step is getting financial documents from the client.
Yes, we've done that earlier, but we're always needing updated information.
Correct. A trial can take a year. So the documents that we had in the beginning of your case might be stale in comparison to the documents that we need at trial. We need some updated documents for that.
Yes. Now, witnesses, because I know you've heard me say this, I'm going to court to win, right? Therefore, we need to know what we got to have in order to win, which usually includes witnesses.
People think you need like an expert witness. Your neighbor can be your witness. Your sister can be your witness. So your witnesses can encompass several different types of aspects with regard to your own personal life. And that just jumps back to what we were saying, like we need as much information with regard to your spouse and your children and those other individuals who also have that relationship. And then you'll be able to provide that to us.
Exactly. If you are in this situation, your attorney has to know these things. You gave me a list of 5 names, which to me, that's better than no names. And then we have to, bring it down. Well, what are our issues? Because that's, I think, big part of trial preparation and knowing it's identifying these are the issues that we need this court to decide. All right, well, what evidence, meaning is it a witness? Is it documentation that the court needs to decide in our favor on this issue?
Exactly.
And right. And so that's why it might be the neighbor, it might be the family member. And what I always like to say first to our client is, well, what do you think they're going to say? We need to talk to them because we're not calling witnesses we haven't spoken with, right?
Exactly.
Because we don't want them to harm you. Because even though you think they might say something one way, we need to hear from them what their recollection is. And then we can, as your attorney, determine, I think this will help. I don't think it'll hurt, right? Because that's even the worst. It might help, but we don't want anybody on there who's going to hurt you.
That's part of the trial prep. Not only us getting the updated documentation and meeting with the witnesses, we need to prep and hear what the witnesses have to say, because if they're going to say something that's adversarial, we want to use that time efficiently.
We will talk about time later in the show, because that's one thing that really shocks people. We talked about it at the beginning with me making the joke about TV and that hour long. The amount of time we do get is something we got to talk about, because you have to be efficient.
Exactly.
With that.
We're taking a quick break, and when we return, we're going to talk about reinventing yourself. Stay with us. Heather, this is a perfect time for women to reinvent themselves.
Absolutely.
But how do I do that?
Well, and that is the big question, right? You have now some time that you may never really have had before. It can be a great time to figure out who you want to be and what you like. Maybe you've pushed aside all the things you like for so long, you don't even know.
When the kids are with the father, you can try something new instead of sitting around sulking.
Now you could just read a book outside without that responsibility.
Sit and relax. You may have associated, I don't like this because I have to do this at a particular time. Why not try again when you don't have that responsibility?
He may look different. Things are different now. And so find what that is. Maybe it's just a nice walk or a bike ride. It doesn't always have to be exercise. I love being outside in Florida. What also can be amazing is painting. It clears your mind a lot.
There are so many places that offer paint and drink a glass of wine. That's just awesome, right? But yeah, you don't have to do that. You can sit at home and paint your wall while you drink a glass of wine.
In my 20s, I had a place and I was like, I'm going to paint the walls because it's a very dated old place. And shocking as it may be, I'd never done anything like that in my life. I did this in law school during exams. I'd go to the Home Depot, get a can of paint, a roller, a paintbrush, whatever, come back the next day covered in paint. I need more paint because I'm not very good at it. And I had calluses. I'd never done anything that hard in my life. At 26, I'd never done any kind of manual labor whatsoever. And I have quite the appreciation for somebody. And I'm talking painting walls. I'm not talking artwork. Focusing on keeping the paint on the wall, not on the ceiling and not on the trim. It allows, you can't have all these other thoughts that may be self-destructive. And maybe you're brightening a room and changing something. Paint really is not that expensive, and it's a very nice way to change the environment. Let's say you're in the same house and you just start with a bathroom or something like that. It can be healthy, making something fresh and new.
It's liberating, and it gives a sense of accomplishment.
It wore me out. A day of painting, and of course I'm covered in it, so I've got to soak in a tub, and I'm like, how am I ever gonna get all this paint off my legs? That's why they wear coveralls, I guess. Painters are better and don't get so much paint on themselves, most likely. Reinventing yourself, new start. It's a new room, even if it's just one space. It's a sense of accomplishment. All those things that you listed, they're very healthy. A good way to spend that weekend if they're not there and you're worried about being sad, especially in the beginning. I do think in the beginning, to be very purposeful about what you're going to do will be very helpful.
When he comes up to pick up the kids, he'll see that the bathroom is yellow and he never liked yellow. And you're like, yep, I did it. You shouldn't do that. Okay. Oh boy. Yes, I'm not helping. Anyway, so.
Oh, you are, because that's natural. But you know what? You're making decisions you can make on your own, and you do not have to get consensus or agreement.
That's what I was thinking. Another thing, you have peace and quiet. You could go to the beach, sit down, read a book. But as a parent, you may feel guilty about doing that because you don't have the kids with you. But you should take that time.
That's right. You can have that guilt, but isn't that better than being sad and you enjoyed yourself? It's a process. For every woman, it's going to be different. At least they know it's going to be different. It might be harder on some days, easier on others. The more secure you feel about your relationship with your children, that it's going to get easier as time goes on.
But it doesn't feel like it at the beginning.
Just like exercising. You run a quarter mile, it's not going to get any easier, but you work it on it and it does.
You build your endurance.
Exactly.
Absolutely. This is a good time to make new friends.
You may be in new situations where you're not with couples as much, or maybe some of your friends previously, it's just different. And you want a different conversation than about married life, trips, and husbands. And so you're like, well, I want to just maybe make some new friends. New activities will help because you're going to different places like yoga or things where you would interact with other people, like a fitness class, or you've maybe joined the Y. And so where you can interact with other individuals, or a church in a different group. Some people, and that's a great way to meet other women and friends. And so there are a lot of places, but it may have been so long ago because now it's, again, doing something different, stepping out of your routine.
Stepping out of your routine, they're important to you, but you also had friends as a couple. That's difficult.
That's natural, and it may be different and it may not. There may be some friends who are really like supporting you, and I think even when your friends support you, sometimes the men are still friends with the guys, women friends with the women, so it's going to be different. It may not be when they invite their couple friends over, and you may feel different. And I think that you never know. And I think every situation is going to be different, and it's really probably going to depend on the level and depth of that friendship as to how it will change.
I wonder if you ever get to a place where you can all get together again, possibly with your new significant other. That takes growth. As a single mom, you try to be perfect. You're thinking, okay, I had these responsibilities before. I'm going to try to keep up and it's going to be right. You have to try to fight that that sense that you have to be perfect in everything.
I would agree. If you're afraid to make mistakes or do something a little different, you're just imposing a lot of stress on yourself, but you're also not really growing, because then you're not going to try anything new because you might mess up. And I heard a speaker say that once, perfection just means you're not doing anything new or different or really trying to grow, because it's impossible to maintain perfection all the time. We strive
to make the best decisions based on the information we have. Sometimes you can let go a little and let the kids have pizza or fast food for dinner. If they don't want to take a bath tonight, it's not the end of the world. There is a lot of stability and comfort in a routine. Sometimes it's nice to give yourself a break. It doesn't have to be this way all the time. That takes growth, recognizing realistically, there's a lot going on. Once I had my third child, I was like, this is a whole different ball game. Party invites, maybe, a few days before, not the 2 weeks and the lovely invitation and all that. Like sometimes it's just like we're making do and giving yourself grace, giving others grace, that it doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes when it's not perfect, it can be better.
And you have to remember perfection doesn't really exist anyway. Not in this way.
And that I think is true.
Yeah.
We think it does, but it doesn't.
No.
You're right.
Anything else you want to add?
I think we've covered it.
Listeners, if you or someone you know is going through divorce or is thinking about a divorce in the Northeast Florida area, please reach out to us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com. You'll find our practice areas and the link to our website in the show notes. Thank you for listening.